My name is Adeel Malik, and I teach an option course on the political economy of institutions and development for the Global Governance Program. And that indeed provides a unifying theme for the research that I conduct. Over the last several years, people have been thinking about broader questions about the origin, development, and impact of institutions in developing countries. My particular area of focus is the Middle East and North Africa, where I'm trying to develop a broader research lens to look at the politics of private sector development. Last year, I wrote a paper on the economics of the Arab Spring, which talked very much about the deeper historical, political, and regional constraints to development. There's also some research that I'm conducting on the political economy of Pakistan, where I'm looking at the historical continuity and change in the way elites are generated and how do they persist over the period of time. So it basically involves looking at historical data on elections and looking at the kind of factors that might result in advantages, specific advantages for elites that also generate political dynasties. These questions are very much geared towards answering sources of divergence, because as a social scientist, that is a big puzzle for us. Why do countries or particular geographic units starting at very similar levels of development diverge over the period of time? I'm also interested in the way in which the internal or domestic factors interact with external factors. So one of the key failings, in my opinion, of the global literature on institutions and development is that it's far too focused on domestic contexts, which clearly matter the most. But there are a large number of countries, whether it's Egypt or Pakistan or Jordan or Saudi Arabia, where it is almost impossible to analyze the problem of institutional change or lack thereof without looking at the external environment. And I'm interested in the ways in which the external interacts with internal, and that therefore becomes a very important issue for students of global governance. Now, with that kind of background, let me provide you a brief snapshot of the research findings that come out of these projects. On the economics of the Arab Spring paper, I find that private sector development is not just a matter of improving investment climate or removing business constraints, as the World Bank would have you, but actually it connects to deeper issues of political economy. For instance, it concerns the nature of the incentive structure faced by the elites. Do elites fear or favor a private sector? Because it is possible that many political elites in developing countries are more fearful, they're more threatened by private sector development because they feel that economic power can quickly generate a political power. Another important, deeper constraint to business sector development has to do with the nature of geostrategic relations. So in terms of the regional fragmentation that we see in the Arab world. For the last 60 years, we've seen that each of these economies is cut off from each other and indeed from international systems of trade and production. And to what extent there's a broader geopolitics and broader politics behind that fragmentation, which maintains it as an equilibrium. In the work on Pakistan and on the elites in Pakistan, I'm looking at the ways in which the British rule in Pakistan was associated with a set of infrastructural interventions such as canal colonization, the awarding of land grants to local elites, and how that process created land as an important economic as well as political asset. And some of those historical elites who were rewarded by the British in the 1930s and before, some of them tend to persist over time. So then the question for us is, why is it that some of these historical elites persist more in some regions than they do in others? And of course, there are classic questions about urbanization, about land ownership, about historical advantages, about the marital alliances that elites make to preserve their power. They're sort of fascinating questions about the genesis and persistence of elites, and hopefully this research would add to the broader agenda of understanding the development and impact of institutions.